Thank you, Paul. It's such a pleasure to be with you all today, here with our friends in Tamarack and with all of you. And I must say, I'm always incredibly inspired to be in a room full of practitioners, which is what you all are. And I could tell that instantly from the last exercise, as you guys were moving the flowers out of the way, buckling down to the work at hand, and obviously coming up with some great, great questions that we'll be diving into together over the next couple of days. So it's just a real pleasure to be with you all today. I also had the opportunity to participate in the Backbone workshop that we partnered with Tamarack and others on in Cincinnati just a few weeks ago. And I must say it was a great opportunity, and you may have seen that from some of the video clips, but just a chance for people to really connect with one another and to learn from one another. And that's something that I'm really excited about for us together as a community over the next couple of days. I'm really excited to learn from all of you and the fabulous work that you're doing here in Canada. We at FSG have been, as John mentioned, really influenced by a lot of your thinking and your great work. And so we're really excited to see that in practice and to really learn from all of you. Over the next couple of days, we're going to be diving in deeply on several topics relating to collective impact. But what we wanted to do first was to start with you all, to really start with the Backbone organization, which is an absolutely critical component of collective impact. Without it, collective impact, effective cross-sector collaboration really can't happen. And so when we talk about the Backbone, it really is a unique animal in the social sector. And what we find is that for a lot of folks, that means that it's very difficult to understand. It's difficult to explain what exactly it means when you're a Backbone organization. And the typical typographies that we use in the social sector really don't adequately describe what a Backbone organization is. So let me just give you a quick example. And I'd love it if we could do a show of hands if, you know, sort of when you talk about the type of organization that you are here representing, if you are a nonprofit, can you raise your hand, please? Okay, great. Hands down. A corporation. Any corporations here? One? Two? Okay. What about government folks? Okay, quite a few of you as well. So really across the spectrum there. What about funders? Any funders? Yep. Quite a few funders as well. Great. So type of organization doesn't necessarily describe you as a Backbone organization, right? What about geography? So how many of you are working on efforts that are city-based, really focusing on efforts within a city? Okay, quite a few. What about rural efforts? Some of you working on rural, great. What about provincial? Okay, and national, so nationally based efforts, great. Quite a few. So again, when you think about geography, being a backbone of a specific geography, that doesn't really describe what it means to be a Backbone organization. What about issue area? So show of hands if you're working on education issues. Right, big table over there, great. The environment. Yep, a few over there. Immigrant issues, immigration. Yep, okay. Economic development. Right. Health. Yep, quite a few hands there. Poverty reduction. I know we'll have quite a few hands there with our great work through Tamarack. Right. So again, you think of the whole variety of social issues, environment, health, education, poverty reduction. That doesn't describe who you are as a backbone. So there are a whole variety of things that you all are working on, and yet what we found through our research is that, in fact, you have quite a lot in common. So there's no question, you guys are chief cat herders. But in addition to that very important role, there is a whole range of roles that you all play in your everyday work. And they're really challenging roles. And they're roles that typically we don't actually see played necessarily all together. And that's really what makes Backbones so unique. So what I'd like to do today, just for this session, is to share with you some research that we did, my FSG colleagues with the Greater Cincinnati Foundation, around really diving into what does it mean to be a backbone organization. We did this research in partnership with Greater Cincinnati Foundation, but also with a wonderful cohort of 6 backbone organizations. These are backbone organizations that GCF funds as a cohort. They're all based in Cincinnati or the environs, but across a whole range of issue areas. So they include education, economic development, workforce. And so we really had the opportunity to work with this group to learn about what the backbone role looks like. So I'll be sharing a bit of that research with you today. We then want to turn to you all to talk in your pods about your role as backbones and how some of the research resonates with you or not. We'd love for you to help us to add to that research and thinking around the role of the backbone. We'll have a large group discussion and debrief around that, and then I'll turn it over to Liz Weaver from Tamarack, who's going to be holding a practitioner panel of backbones here in the center, so we can really hear from some on-the-ground experiences around backbones. So just to start with the research, as I mentioned, we spent several months with this cohort of backbone organizations, and what we were trying to do was really understand what it means to be a backbone, to put a finer point on this unique set of roles that you all are playing. And what we did was we defined a common theory of change, which held across all 6 of these different backbone organizations, despite the fact that they cover different geographies and issue areas. And what we found is that really backbones are helping to bring together cross-sector players to create a system, in many cases where there isn't one, where there is inefficiency or fragmentation, and really help to bring together those sectors around an issue to create a system that works effectively. So we started with the theory of change, and we also defined a set of 6 backbone roles, which I'll talk through in just a minute. But we also collected perspectives from the backbones themselves, as well as from many of the stakeholders out in the community. And that was really helpful to get a sense from others around the roles that backbones were playing and why those were so important, why they seem to be making effective progress against an issue. And then finally, we really worked with the cohort of 6 backbone organizations to facilitate learning among them. And what we found was that that was incredibly valuable, that they actually had a lot to learn from one another, that they could really support one another in their work. And that, frankly, was really the seed that led to this gathering, because we really understood and learned how important it is to create that community of practice among backbone organizations, no matter what issue area or geography that they work in. So what did we find? Essentially, when we worked with this cohort, we found that there were really 6 critical roles that backbone organizations play in their work. And the first one is to guide the vision and strategy for the effort. And by this, I mean really holding the vision for the entire effort. This includes helping to facilitate the process that allows all the stakeholders to come together around a common agenda, meaning that they have the same understanding of the problem that they're trying to solve together. And the backbone organization really plays a critical role in enabling that to happen. What is that problem that we're trying to solve? It's often much more difficult to get to that common agenda than you would think. The second role is around supporting aligned activities. And this is really about connecting the dots between the many different stakeholders that are working on a single issue. Really helping to get to that mutually reinforcing activities. There are so many examples of this, and I'm sure that you all have examples in your own communities. But we came across a community in the northeast of the US with a population of 85,000 people. So not a very big community. And what we found was that within this community, there were 280 youth development organizations. So organizations working on youth development, just in this one community. And what we also found was that each of these youth development organizations were largely disconnected and had limited overlap or communication with the other, 279 organizations that were in many cases serving the same kids. So this is what we mean by fragmentation. And this is so common to what we see in our communities. The backbone organization's role is to break down those silos, enable the communication among the different players that are working on an issue. help them to see where their activities are actually reinforcing. It also means that it's bringing new players to the table that may not be there now, helping partners to talk to one another in ways that they haven't been in the past, providing technical assistance to individual stakeholders to enable them to partner more effectively. These are all the things that we mean by really supporting aligned activities within a collective impact effort. The third area is really critical, and that is around establishing shared measurement practices. This is one of the most difficult parts of collective impact we've found, or certainly that we've heard from practitioners on the ground in doing this work. And this really means, from a Backbone's perspective, helping to facilitate the process of getting everyone to agree on a discrete set of measures that will help you to see whether or not you're making progress towards your goal, making a difference in the issue that you're working. And in addition to really establishing those measures, Backbone organizations typically help to collect the data around those shared measures, to synthesize them. What do they mean? Data doesn't mean anything unless you actually think about that and translate it into action. And ultimately to help the different stakeholders to learn from the data and to course correct as they go. So the shared measurement practices are a critical role that many Backbones play in their communities. The fourth role is around building public will. And this is really about engaging the community at multiple levels, really to help to inform the community about the issue and what's happening, but also really to build momentum for change in the community. We've really seen Backbones able to create a sense of urgency for change, a sense that the status quo is not sufficient, that we have to do things together more effectively and differently going forward in order to get to our goal. This also frequently means that Backbones have a critical communications role that they have to play in order to really engage the community and to build public will. The fifth area is advancing policy, which is something that we have seen you all in Canada as being particularly talented at, and we'd love to learn more from you about this. But really educating policymakers about what the options are and how to improve policy, but also coming back to building public will, being able to mobilize all the stakeholders, bringing them together to come together around a common policy agenda that is really going to create change for an issue. And then finally, mobilizing funding. Now, when we wrote this white paper with the Greater Cincinnati Foundation, we called it Mobilizing Funding. But in fact, we got a friendly amendment from our Backbone friends in the Cincinnati convening, and they really felt that it should be mobilizing resources more broadly. And we felt that that was a really good amendment. So how does a Backbone organization mobilize funding? Yes, public and private, critically both, but also mobilize all the resources in a community towards change on a specific issue. One of the things that we have seen in abundance is that when a set of stakeholders has a clear goal, clear measures, an infrastructure, or a backbone, a coordinating entity around an issue, they are often much better positioned to leverage funding for their effort. As an example of that, we've been working with a Cradle to College and Career Education reform effort in South Seattle for the last couple of years. And they put a proposal in as a group, as a region, across 7 different school districts for a Race to the Top grant. And because they had a clear goal, clear shared measures that everyone had agreed to, signed MOUs, all the districts and community colleges and nonprofits, mayors were aligned, they received a $40 million Race to the Top grant. And they'd be the first ones to tell you that it was because they had that infrastructure, that goal, those measures in place when they applied. And in fact, they were the only region in the United States to win the highest amount of the grant. So really great evidence of having those pieces in place being really effective for leveraging additional funding. So 6 core roles then: guiding vision and strategy, supporting aligned activities, establishing shared measurement practices, building public will, advancing policy, and mobilizing funding. All absolutely critical for Backbone organizations. But what we found is that the way that Backbone organizations play these roles differs quite a bit, depending on the context, that you're working in, and also the stage, whether you're earlier on or in a more mature initiative. Earlier on, the first two, guiding vision and strategy, supporting aligned activities, are really critical. Shared measurement, also just really critical to have from the beginning. And really what we find is that as efforts become more mature, they're really then much more able to build public will and advance policy, for example. So it's very dependent. The other thing that we have found, though, across all of these roles is that there is an inherent tension for backbone organizations around coordinating the many stakeholders and at the same time creating a shared accountability for the results of the effort. And what that means is that we often see backbone organizations playing more of a behind-the-scenes leadership role, which is something, at least in the US, folks aren't necessarily that used to or comfortable with, but is absolutely critical in getting that broader buy-in from the many stakeholders that are working together on an issue. So in the 2 years or so since the initial collective impact article was published in the Stanford Social Innovation Review, we have seen tremendous shifts and changes. And obviously a wholesale, in many cases, adoption of collective impact in the theory. But we've also seen some really interesting trends around this, which we sometimes find a bit concerning. The backbone organization has become extremely popular. In fact, you might even say sexy, even. And in many communities, we've seen that there are many, many organizations that really want to be the backbone organization. In fact, in some communities in which we've worked, we've had to put in place an RFP process to help to select the best backbone organization, because there are so many organizations that are really eager to take on that role. Now, not to say that you all aren't sexy, you are, obviously. But we feel that that some of this may be driven by some misperceptions about the roles of the backbone organizations. And it's just as important to talk about some of those myths around backbone organizations as it is to share some of the research around the roles that backbones are playing. So one of these common misperceptions is that the backbone organization sets the agenda for the effort. That they're the ones that say, okay, this is the goal and here's how we're going to achieve it. When in fact, the role of the backbone is really to coordinate all the different stakeholders to come together to figure that out jointly. The convening and iteration roles that the backbone plays are absolutely critical. It is not the backbone alone that sets the agenda, but more in conjunction with the other stakeholders. Another major misperception that we've seen is that the backbone organization is the one that drives solutions. In fact, the backbone organization rarely provides services, in some cases they do, but rarely not, or funding. And in fact, what the backbone organization helps to do is to support the ongoing learning and course correction among the many stakeholders that are doing the work to get to those solutions. Often, again, playing more of a behind-the-scenes role. A third misperception is that backbone organizations receive all the funding. This is often what we hear from folks that are very interested in taking on the backbone role. And for those of you that have been playing the backbone role for many years, you know that this is not the case. And in fact, we've had to work really hard to help to shift the mindsets of funders to understand the value of a backbone organization. That in fact, they are creating huge leverage by helping all the different stakeholders to work together more effectively towards a common goal. But no, the backbone organization does not receive all the funding. We've also seen examples where a backbone organization will self-appoint. I'm the backbone organization, everybody. Okay, let's do this collective impact thing. And as we know from experience, and I'm sure as all of you have experienced, that is really not the case. The community really needs to come together and decide what backbone structure makes the most sense. What organization or organizations are the most credible and can really help to move the whole effort forward. And then finally, the sense that collective impact is really just collaboration, that the backbone is just business as usual, collaboration the way that we've always done it. And of course, that isn't the case. What we found is that for a successful backbone, there must be dedicated capacity. And this takes time, it takes staff that is really focused on bringing all the players together and bringing them forward towards a common goal, really looking at the data on an ongoing basis, helping with the continuous communication, really all aspects of collective impact. So these misperceptions, I'm sure, probably look laughable to you, but I think that they do get in the way of effective implementation for cross-sector collaborations. And it's really up to all of us to help to debunk some of these myths. So the last thing I wanted to talk about from our research is that in addition to identifying critical roles that backbone organizations play, when we talked with the stakeholders in the community in Cincinnati that were working with these 6 different backbone organizations, one of the things that we heard from them around what makes backbone successful is that the backbone leaders themselves are absolutely critical. Having the right kind of leader for the backbone organization really makes a tremendous difference. And when we probed further to understand what kind of leader seems to be effective in collective impact, we heard several characteristics that all of the backbone leaders in this cohort seem to share. And it's worth just talking through these here, because I think, again, that they are in some ways unique. The first, of course, is visionary. That the leader really sees the big picture, can hold that larger vision in their heads and communicate it effectively to the different stakeholders, going back to that guiding vision and strategy role that backbones play so critically. That backbone leaders are results-oriented, that they are very focused on data and on actions to get them to where they're trying to get to. Of course, that they're collaborative. Often we heard that backbone leaders work through others. That they're focused but adaptive. And one of the best quotes that we heard from folks was that backbone leaders are willing to listen to any idea, but have the uncanny ability to act only on those ideas that were going to get them closer to the goal. So really this ability to be adaptive, but really focused. Charismatic, of course, I mentioned the ability to communicate effectively. Politically savvy. This is, as you all know, a very political undertaking in terms of bringing these different players together, and also very humble. Ratna mentioned earlier the idea of a servant leader, and that is something that we have consistently seen across successful backbone organizations, that their leaders see themselves as servant leaders, and this ability to lead adaptively and from behind. So this is just a quick overview of the research around backbones. We'd love to turn it over to you all now, really as our experts in the room, to talk a bit about how this resonates with your own experiences and with your own work. So what we're going to ask you to do now is just to turn into your pods, and we'd love for you to discuss a few questions. First of all, when you think about these 6 roles, and I should mention that they are listed on page 41 of your spiral notebooks as well, if you'd like to refer back to them. How does that align with the work that you feel that you're doing? So when you think about the roles that you play in your own efforts, do you feel like you're playing these 6 roles? And how would you modify them, or perhaps add to them? Are there other roles that you're playing that aren't listed there? What do you think are the most important roles in creating change in your community, specifically from a collective impact lens? So of these 6, which are the most important? And then finally, which roles do you think are the most difficult? What's most challenging to you in your work? And we'd love for you, you've got 3 different colored stickies on your tables, to use the 3 different colors for the 3 different questions. So if you could use the yellow stickies for modifying your roles, the green stickies for roles that are most important, and then the pink stickies for the most challenging or most difficult roles. And we'll give you about 30 minutes or so to dive into that in your pods. So have fun with that.